Roy Stewart Moore, born February 11, 1947, is an American politician and jurist who served as the 28th and 32nd Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Alabama. He was the Republican nominee in the 2017 United States Senate special election in Alabama to fill the seat vacated by Jeff Sessions. Moore lost by 1.7% to Democratic candidate Doug Jones. Moore attended West Point and served as a company commander in the Military Police Corps during the Vietnam War. After graduating from the University of Alabama Law School, he joined the Etowah County District Attorney's Office, serving as an assistant district attorney from 1977 to 1982. In 1992 he was appointed as a circuit judge to fill a vacancy, and elected to the position at the end of the term. In 2001 Moore was elected to the position of Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Alabama. He was removed from his position in November 2003 by the Alabama Court of the Judiciary for refusing a federal court's order to remove a marble monument of the Ten Commandments. Moore sought the Republican nomination for the governorship of Alabama in 2006 and 2010, but lost in the primaries. Moore was again elected Chief Justice in 2013, but was suspended in May 2016, for defying a U.S. Supreme Court decision about same-sex marriage. Moore resigned in April 2017, and in September 2017 was nominated for the U.S. Senate seat vacated by Jeff Sessions. During this special election campaign for U.S. Senate, allegations of sexual misconduct were made against him. 3 women stated that he had sexually assaulted them when they were at the respective ages of 14, 16, and 28. Moore acknowledged that he may have approached and dated teenagers while he was in his 30s, but denied that any of the girls were underage or that he had sexually assaulted anyone. President Donald Trump endorsed Moore a week before the election, after which some Republicans withdrew their opposition to Moore. Democrat Doug Jones won the election. Moore is considered an advocate of far-right politics. He attracted national media attention and controversy over what have been called strongly racist, homophobic, transphobic, anti-Semitic and Islamophobic views, his belief that Christianity should order public policy, and his past ties to neo-Confederates and white nationalist groups. Moore was a leading voice in the birther movement, which promoted the false claim that former President Barack Obama was not born in the United States. He founded the Foundation for Moral Law, a non-profit legal organization from which he collected more than $1 million over 5 years, though a far smaller amount was indicated on its disclosure forms. Early life, education and military service. Moore was born in Gadsden, Alabama, the seat of Etowah County, to construction worker Roy Baxter Moore, who died in 1967, and the former Evelyn Stewart. His parents met and married after his father, who served during World War II, was discharged from the United States Army. Moore was the oldest of 5 children. While growing up, he had 2 brothers and 2 sisters. In 1954, the Moores relocated to Houston, Texas, the site of a post-war building boom. After about 4 years, they returned to Alabama, then moved to Pennsylvania, and then returned permanently to Alabama. Moore's father worked for the Tennessee Valley Authority, first building dams and later the Anniston Army Depot. Moore attended his freshman year of high school at Gallant near Gadsden, and transferred to Etowah County High School for his final 3 years, graduating in 1965. Moore was admitted to the United States Military Academy at West Point, New York, on the recommendation of outgoing Democratic U.S. Representative Albert Raines, and after confirmation of that nomination by incoming Republican Representative James D. Martin of Gadsden. He graduated in 1969 with a Bachelor of Science degree. With the Vietnam War underway, Moore served in several posts as a military police officer, including Fort Benning, Georgia, and Ilsheim, Germany, before being deployed to the Republic of Vietnam. Serving as the commander of 188th Military Police Company of the 504th Military Police Battalion, Moore was perceived to be reckless, but very strict. He insisted his troops salute him on the battlefield, despite official training which discourages such behavior because salutes can identify an officer to enemy targeting. Some of his soldiers gave him the derogatory nickname Captain America, due to his attitude toward discipline. This role earned him enemies, and in his autobiography he recalls sleeping on sandbags to avoid a grenade or bomb being tossed under his cot, as many of his men had threatened him with fragging. Moore was discharged from the United States Army as a captain in 1974, and was admitted to the University of Alabama School of Law that same year. Professors and fellow students held him in low regard due to his incapacity for keen analysis. He graduated in 1977 with a Juris Doctor degree and returned to Gadsden to begin private practice with a focus on personal injury and insurance cases. Elections and travels. Moore soon moved to the district attorney's office, working as the first full-time prosecutor in Etowah County. During his tenure there, Moore was investigated by the State Bar for suspect conduct after convening a grand jury to examine what he perceived to have been funding shortages in the sheriff's office. Several weeks after the State Bar investigation was dismissed as unfounded, Moore quit his prosecuting position to run as a Democrat for the county's circuit court judge seat in 1982. The election was bitter, with Moore alleging that cases were being delayed in exchange for payoffs. The allegations were never substantiated. Moore overwhelmingly lost the Democratic runoff primary to fellow attorney Donald Stewart, whom Moore described as an honorable man for whom I have much respect, who eventually became a close friend. A second bar complaint against Moore followed, which was dismissed as unfounded. Moore left Gadsden shortly thereafter to live for a year in Australia. In Australia, a country Moore said later he had wanted to visit after his service in Vietnam but was unable to at the time, he went to Queensland. From the state capital, Brisbane, he first went to Ayr and helped with the sugar cane harvest, then inland to what is now the Central Highlands region, where he fulfilled his long-time desire to see the outback, eventually working at the Teleman Ranch near Springshire, a town where many residents are devout Christians. One of them, the Rolfe family, ran Teleman and spoke highly of Moore to The Guardian in 2017. "I don't think he'd ever done that sort of manual labor in his life," said Isla Turner, daughter of Colin Rolfe, who had taken Moore in, but he took to it like a duck to water. Moore returned to Gadsden in 1985, and at that time married Kayla Kaiser. He ran in 1986 for Etowah County's district attorney position against fellow Democrat Jimmy Hedgespeth. Losing once more, Moore returned to private practice in the city. In 1992, Moore switched his affiliation to the GOP. Marriage and children. Moore first noticed his wife, Kayla Kaiser, when she was a young teenager performing at a dance recital. In his 2005 autobiography, Moore described his reaction, writing, "I knew Kayla was going to be a special person in my life." Years later, Moore and Kaiser met again at a Christmas party. By then she had married and had a child, but was separated from her husband. Moore and Kaiser married a year later in 1985, when he was 38 and she was 24. Their 4 children are now adults. Judicial career. Circuit Judge, 1992–2000. Appointment. In 1992, Etowah County Circuit Judge Julius Swan died in office. Republican Governor H. Guy Hunt was charged with making a temporary appointment until the next election. Moore's name was floated by some of his associates, and a background check was initiated with several state and county agencies, including the Etowah County District Attorney's Office. Moore's former political opponent Jimmy Hedgespeth, who still helmed the D.A.S. office, recommended Moore despite personal reservations, and Moore was installed in the position he had failed to win in 1982. Moore ran as a Republican in the 1994 Etowah County election and was elected to the circuit judge seat, 6-year term, with 62% of the vote. He was the first county-wide Republican to win since Reconstruction. Early Prayer/Ten Commandments controversy. During Moore's tenure as circuit judge, he hung a homemade wooden Ten Commandments plaque on the wall of his courtroom behind his bench. Moore told the Montgomery Advertiser that his intention in hanging the plaque was to fill up the bare space on the courtroom walls and to indicate the importance of the Ten Commandments. He stated that it was not his intention to generate controversy. He told The Atlantic that he understood the potential for controversy existed, but I wanted to establish the moral foundation of our law. While Moore presided over a murder case shortly after his appointment, the defendant's attorney objected to the plaque. This attracted the attention of critics who also objected to Moore's practice of opening court sessions with a prayer beseeching divine guidance for jurors in their deliberations. In at least one case, Moore asked a clergyman to lead the court's jury pool in prayer. The local branch of the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, sent a letter in June 1993 threatening a lawsuit if such prayers did not cease. On June 20, 1994, the ACLU sent a representative to Moore's courtroom to observe and record the pre-session prayer. Though the organization did not immediately file suit, Moore decried the action as an act of intimidation in a post-trial press conference. The incident drew additional attention to Moore while he was campaigning to hold onto his circuit court seat. In that year's election, Moore won the seat in a landslide victory over attorney Keith Pitts, who had unsuccessfully prosecuted the Silk and Satin murder case. Lawsuit. In March 1995, the ACLU filed a lawsuit against Moore, stating that the pre-session prayers and the Ten Commandments display were both unconstitutional. This original lawsuit was eventually dismissed for technical reasons, but Governor Fob James instructed State Attorney General Bill Pryor to file suit in Montgomery County in support of Moore. The case ended up before State Circuit Judge Charles Price, who in 1996 declared the prayers unconstitutional but initially allowed the Ten Commandments plaque to remain on the courtroom walls. Immediately after the ruling, Moore held a press conference vowing to defy the ruling against pre-session prayers and affirming a religious intent in displaying the plaque. Critics responded by asking Price to reconsider his previous ruling, and the judge issued a new ruling requiring the Ten Commandments plaque to be removed in 10 days. Moore appealed Price's decision and kept the plaque up. 10 days later, the Alabama Supreme Court issued a temporary stay against the ruling. The court never ruled in the case, throwing it out for technical reasons in 1998. Chief Justice, Alabama Supreme Court, 2001-2003, and 2012-2016. Campaign and election. In late 1999, the American Family Association began working to draft Moore into the race for Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court, when incumbent Republican Perry O. Hooper, Sr., of Montgomery announced that he would not seek re-election. Moore said that he was hesitant to make the statewide race because he had absolutely no funds and 3 other candidates, particularly Associate Justice Harold C., were well-financed. Nevertheless, on December 7, 1999, Moore announced from his Etowah County courtroom that he would enter the race with the hope of returning God to our public life and restore the moral foundation of our law. His campaign centered on religious issues, arguing that Christianity's declining influence corresponded directly with school violence, homosexuality, and crime. Associate Justice Harold C. was the heavy favorite to win the Republican nomination because of his support from the state business community and the party hierarchy, including Chief Justice Hooper. However, as Moore made headway in state polls, he elicited the help of Republican strategist Karl Rove, advisor to Texas Governor and future President George W. Bush. Despite Rove's support and significantly more campaign funding, he lost the primary to Moore. Judge Moore also beat two other opponents, criminal appeals Judge Pam Baskab, and Jefferson County Presiding Circuit Judge Wayne Thorne, in the Republican primary without a runoff garnering over 50% of the statewide primary vote. Judge Moore then easily defeated Democratic contender Sharon Yates in November's general election with over 60% of the vote. Moore was sworn in as Chief Justice on January 15, 2001. Republican former U.S. Representative James D. Martin, who had appointed Moore to West Point years earlier, was among the dignitaries in attendance. On taking the position, Moore said that he had come to realize the real meaning of the First Amendment and its relationship to the God on whom the oath was based. My mind had been opened to the spiritual war occurring in our state and our nation that was slowly removing the knowledge of that relationship between God and law. I pledged to support not only the U.S. Constitution, but the Alabama Constitution as well, which provided in its preamble that the state established justice by invoking the favor and guidance of Almighty God. The connection between God and our law could not be more clear. Ten Commandments Monument Controversy. Construction and installation. A month after his election, Moore began making plans for a larger monument to the Ten Commandments, reasoning that the Alabama Supreme Court building required something grander than a wooden plaque. His final design involved a 5,280-pound, 2,400 kilograms, granite block, 3 feet wide by 3 feet deep by 4 feet tall, covered with quotes from the Declaration of Independence, the national anthem, and various founding fathers. The crowning element would be 2 large carved tablets inscribed with the Ten Commandments. High-grade granite from Vermont was ordered and shipped, and Moore found benefactors and a sculptor to complete the job. On the evening of July 31, 2001, despite some initial installation difficulties and concerns regarding structural support for the monument's weight, Moore had the completed monument transported to the State Judicial Building and installed in the central rotunda. The installation was filmed, and videotapes of the event were sold by Coral Ridge Ministries, an evangelical media outlet in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, which later used proceeds from the sales of the film to underwrite Moore's ensuing legal expenses. Coral Ridge was the operation of the late televangelist Reverend D. James Kennedy, a staunch Moore supporter. The next morning, Moore held a press conference in the central rotunda to officially unveil the monument. In a speech following the unveiling, Moore declared, "Today a cry has gone out across our land for the acknowledgement of that God upon whom this nation and our laws were founded. May this day mark the restoration of the moral foundation of law to our people and the return to the knowledge of God in our land." Federal lawsuit. On October 30, 2001, the ACLU of Alabama, Americans United for Separation of Church and State and the Southern Poverty Law Center were among groups that filed suit in the United States District Court for the Middle District of Alabama, asking that the monument be removed because it sends a message to all who enter the state judicial building that the government encourages and endorses the practice of religion in general and Judeo-Christianity in particular. The trial, titled Glassroth v. Moore, began on October 15, 2002. Evidence for the plaintiffs included testimony that lawyers of different religious beliefs had changed their work practices, including routinely avoiding visiting the court building to avoid passing by the monument, and testimony that the monument created a religious atmosphere, with many people using the area for prayer. Moore argued that he would not remove the monument, as doing so would violate his oath of office. Serves to remind the appellate courts and judges of the circuit and district court of this state and members of the bar who appear before them, as well as the people of Alabama who visit the Alabama Judicial Building, of the truth stated in the preamble to the Alabama Constitution that in order to establish justice we must invoke the favor and guidance of Almighty God. On this note, Moore said that the Ten Commandments are the moral foundation of U.S. law, stating that in order to restore this foundation, we must first recognize the source from which all morality springs. Recognize the sovereignty of God. He added that the addition of the monument to the state judiciary building marked the beginning of the restoration of the moral foundation of law to our people and a return to the knowledge of God in our land. Additionally, Moore acknowledged an explicit theistic intent in placing the monument, agreeing that the monument reflects the sovereignty of God over the affairs of men and acknowledge God's overruling power over the affairs of men. However, in Moore's view this did not violate the doctrine of separation of church and state, as the presiding judge later summarized it. Moore argued the Judeo-Christian God reigned over both the church and the state in this country, and that both owed allegiance to that God, although they must keep their affairs separate. Judgment and Appeal. On November 18, 2002, Federal U.S. District Judge Myron Thompson issued his ruling declaring that the monument violated the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and was thus unconstitutional. If all Chief Justice Moore had done were to emphasize the Ten Commandments' historical and educational importance, or their importance as a model code for good citizenship, this court would have a much different case before it. But the Chief Justice did not limit himself to this. He went far, far beyond. He installed a 2.5-ton monument in the most prominent place in a government building, managed with dollars from all state taxpayers, with the specific purpose and effect of establishing a permanent recognition of the sovereignty of God, the Judeo-Christian God, over all citizens in this country, regardless of each tax-paying citizen's individual personal beliefs or lack thereof. To this, the Establishment Clause says no. Judge Thompson's decision mandated that Moore remove the monument from the State Judicial Building by January 3, 2003, but stayed this order on December 23, 2002, after Moore appealed the decision to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. This appeal was argued on June 4, 2003, before a 3-judge panel in Atlanta, Georgia. On July 1, 2003, the panel issued a ruling upholding the lower court's decision, agreeing that the monument fails 2 of Lemon's 3 prongs. It violates the Establishment Clause. Additionally, the court noted that different religious traditions assign different wordings of the Ten Commandments, meaning that choosing which version of the Ten Commandments to display can have religious endorsement implications. In response to the appeals court's decision, Judge Thompson lifted his earlier stay on August 5, 2003, requiring Moore to have the monument removed from public areas of the State Judicial Building by August 20. Protests and monument removal. On August 14, Moore announced his intention to defy Judge Thompson's order to have the monument removed. 2 days later, large rallies in support of Moore and the Ten Commandments monument formed in front of the Judicial Building, featuring speakers such as Alan Keyes, the Reverend Jerry Falwell, and Moore himself. The crowd peaked at an estimated count of 4,000 that day, and anywhere from several hundred to over 1,000 protesters remained through the end of August. The time limit for removal expired on August 20, with the monument still in place in the building's rotunda. As specified in Judge Thompson's order, the state of Alabama faced fines of $5,000 a day until the monument was removed. In response, the 8 other members of the Alabama Supreme Court intervened on August 21, unanimously overruled Moore, and ordered the removal of the monument. Moore said that Thompson, fearing that I would not obey his order, decided to threaten other state officials and force them to remove the monument if I did not do so. A threat of heavy fines was his way of coercing obedience to that order, an action that Moore sees as a violation of the 11th Amendment to the United States Constitution. On August 27, the monument was moved to a non-public side room in the judicial building. The monument was not immediately removed from the building for several reasons pending legal hearings: the monument's weight, worries that the monument could break through the floor if it was taken outside intact, and a desire to avoid confrontation with protesters massed outside the structure. The monument was not actually removed from the state judicial building until July 19, 2004. Removal from office. On August 22, 2003, 2 days after the deadline for the Ten Commandments monument's removal had passed, the Alabama Judicial Inquiry Commission, JIC, filed a complaint with the Alabama Court of the Judiciary, COJ, a panel of judges, lawyers, and others appointed variously by judges, legal leaders, the governor and the lieutenant governor. The complaint effectively suspended Moore from the Chief Justice position pending a hearing by the COJ. The COJ ethics hearing was held on November 12, 2003. Moore repeated his earlier sentiment that to acknowledge God cannot be a violation of the canons of ethics. Without God there can be no ethics. He also acknowledged that he would repeat his defiance of the court order if given another opportunity to do so, and that if he returned to office, I certainly wouldn't leave in a closet, shrouded from the public. In closing arguments, the Assistant Attorney General said Moore's defiance, left unchecked, undercuts the entire workings of the judicial system. What message does that send to the public, to other litigants? The message it sends is, if you don't like a court order, you don't have to follow it. Moore had previously stated his belief that the order was unlawful, and that compliance with such an order was not an enforceable mandate. The next day, the COJ issued a unanimous opinion ruling that Chief Justice Moore has violated the Alabama canons of judicial ethics as alleged by the JIC in its complaint. The COJ had several disciplinary options, including censure or suspension without pay, but because Moore's responses had indicated he would defy any similar court orders in the future, the COJ concluded that under these circumstances, there is no penalty short of removal from office that would resolve this issue. Moore was immediately removed from his post. Moore appealed the COJ's ruling to the Supreme Court of Alabama on December 10, 2003. A special panel of retired judges and justices was randomly selected to hear the case. Moore argued that the COJ did not consider the underlying legality of the federal court's order that the monument be removed from the courthouse. The Alabama Supreme Court rejected this argument, saying that the COJ did not have the authority to overrule the federal courts, only to determine whether Moore violated the canons of judicial ethics. Therefore, the court reasoned, it was enough to show that a procedurally valid order was in place against Moore. Moore also argued that the COJ had imposed a religious test on him to hold his office, and that the COJ's actions had violated his own rights under the Free Exercise Clause of the First Amendment. The Supreme Court of Alabama rejected each of these arguments as well, and ruled on April 30, 2004, that the COJ had acted properly. The court also upheld the sanction of removal as appropriate. Return to the bench. Moore sought to return to the bench, and in the March 2012 Republican primary for Chief Justice of Alabama, Moore won the Republican nomination, defeating the sitting Chief Justice Chuck Malone, who had been appointed by Governor Bentley the previous year, and Mobile County Circuit Judge Charles Graddick. In the November 2012 general election, Moore defeated the Democratic nominee, Jefferson County Circuit Judge Bob Vance, and returned to the bench. Moore received 913,021 votes, to Vance's 850,816 votes. Views on same-sex marriage. On January 28, 2015, the Southern Poverty Law Center filed a judicial ethics complaint against Moore, stating that he had publicly commented on pending same-sex marriage cases and encouraged state officials and judges to ignore federal court rulings overturning bans on same-sex marriage. Moore issued an order to probate judges and their employees on February 8, the day before a federal court ruling legalizing same-sex marriage in Alabama was set to take effect, ordering them to disregard the ruling and enforce the state's ban under threat of legal action by the governor. On February 9, after the United States Supreme Court allowed the federal court ruling to take effect, probate judges in Birmingham, Montgomery, and Huntsville disobeyed Moore and issued marriage licenses to same-sex couples. On January 6, 2016, after the U.S. Supreme Court issued its opinion in Obergefell v. Hodges the previous June, Moore issued an administrative order to lower court judges stating, until further decision by the Alabama Supreme Court, the existing orders of the Alabama Supreme Court that Alabama probate judges have a ministerial duty not to issue any marriage license contrary to the Alabama Sanctity of Marriage Amendment or the Alabama Marriage Protection Act remain in full force and effect. 2016 suspension from the bench and resignation. On May 6, 2016, the Alabama Judicial Inquiry Commission, JIC, forwarded a list of 6 charges of ethical violations by Moore to the Alabama Court of the Judiciary. Moore was suspended from the Alabama Supreme Court pending trial and ruling. Moore faced removal from office over the charges, which were more serious than those which removed him from office in 2003. The JIC's complaint charged Moore with violating the Alabama canon of judicial ethics by disregarding a federal injunction, demonstrated unwillingness to follow clear law, abuse of administrative authority, substituting his judgment for the judgment of the entire Alabama Supreme Court, including failure to abstain from public comment about a pending proceeding in his own court. Interference with legal process and remedies in the United States District Court and/or Alabama Supreme Court related to proceedings in which Alabama probate judges were involved. Failure to recuse himself from pending proceedings in the Alabama Supreme Court after making public comment and placing his impartiality into question. On May 27, Moore filed a federal lawsuit against the JIC, Moore v. Judicial Inquiry Commission, alleging that his automatic suspension was unconstitutional. On August 4, the federal district court dismissed Moore's suit, ruling that under the abstention doctrine, federal courts generally do not interfere with ongoing state court proceedings. Suspension by the Court of the Judiciary. In June 2016, Moore filed a motion to dismiss the JIC proceedings, arguing, among other things, that the JIC and Alabama Court of the Judiciary lacked jurisdiction to review administrative orders that he issued and that the orders of the Alabama Supreme Court were still in effect from the Alabama Policy Institute proceedings prohibiting the issuance of same-sex marriage licenses by probate judges in Alabama, despite the rulings in Obergefell v. Hodges issued by the U.S. Supreme Court, Searcy v. Strange, Strasser v. Strange, and the decision of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit, which held that the orders were abrogated by Obergefell. The Court of the Judiciary set a hearing date for the motion to dismiss and ruled that it would be treated as a motion for summary judgment pertaining to the charges filed by the JIC. The Human Rights Campaign, an LGBT rights group, responded, "It is clear that Roy Moore not only believes he is above the law, he believes he is above judicial ethics." Moore was tasked with upholding the law of the land when marriage equality was affirmed by the Supreme Court of the United States, and he defied that task, in the process harming loving, committed same-sex couples across Alabama for his own personal, discriminatory reasons. In July 2016, the JIC filed a cross motion for summary judgment, asking the Court of the Judiciary to issue summary judgment removing Moore from the bench. Attorneys for the JIC wrote, "Because the Chief Justice has proven and promised that he will not change his behavior, he has left this court with no choice but to remove him from office to preserve the integrity, independence, impartiality of Alabama's judiciary and the citizens who depend on it for justice. In their reply, Moore, through his attorneys at Liberty Counsel, denied that Moore had directed Alabama's probate judges to disobey an injunction issued by the U.S. District Court for the Middle District of Alabama, asserting that,
Please subscribe and thanks for watching.